What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 634. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, sporting a sweet new haircut, is Scott-Vargas. Looking good, buddy.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
How you doing, man? What's up?
Oh, doing well. You know, just looking forward to finally bidding farewell to Crimson Vow here. This one overstayed its welcome.
It did, right? And we'll talk about that. We're doing the Crimson Vow Sunset Show, but you cannot escape the feeling of exactly what you just said. It feels like it's overstayed its welcome. Not that it was a bad set, not that I hated it, not that I can't, but like, I don't want to draft it today, right? And I don't know too many people that do. I've seen streamers, you know, that are hardcore drafters, and they're like, yeah, I just can't bring myself to draft VOW again, so I'm going to play some other game. You know, I mean, it's like to that level. It is a little weird how long the sets hang around, this particular, the fall set. But we're going to go over it still. It's still worth a little review, looking back at it and seeing all of the ups and downs, and of course our conclusions on it as well as a set. And that's what we're doing today on the show. And also at the end of the show, we're going to talk about our Neon Dynasty previews. We got 2 preview cards, and they are some sweet ones too. Before we get into all that, though, let's mention our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for everything you need Magic related. And that includes content. Look, they're kind of the biggest game in town now by a lot. There's, you know, some recent news last week, and, you know, about Star City basically shutting down the content side of their site. And, you know, that really does mean that there's a big emphasis on CFB and CFB Pro now for their content. And thank goodness they're still around. I mean, you know, this stuff may not have as big of an audience as it once did, but there is definitely still an audience for this stuff. And if you are part of that, you probably are, because you're listening to this podcast. Limited is kind of its own thing. You know, it has its own, people like to draft. And yes, sometimes that was relevant for professional high level play, but I think most people, you know, like to draft because it's awesome and they just want to do it over and over and be as good as they can be. And that's kind of the audience that we serve for the most part. But you can find limited stuff on CFB Pro. You can also find stuff for Constructed if you are trying to qualify for an event or win some money online at one of the arena opens or anything like that. CFB Pro is a place to go for that. And it's very affordable as well. And there is also the free side of CFB content as well. So, you know, if it's not in the cards for you to get CFB Pro at this time, you still have access to videos and stuff like that, from some of the best players. So a lot to look forward to over there. And then of course, if you need singles, there's the new CFB marketplace, as well as, you know, sealed product and all of that over at Channel Fireball. So make sure you check them out. If you end up buying anything, if you use the affiliate code LR at checkout, it lets them know that we sent you over, and we do appreciate it. The show's also brought to you by FTX. That's the safe, regulated marketplace for your digital assets, think like cryptocurrencies and such. And if you're interested in, getting in on blockchain technology going forward, FTX is the place to go. If you're inside the United States, it's ftx.us. And if you're outside, it's ftx.com. And I'll remind you, of course, that, you know, these are investments. And so you need to be careful with your investments, and you need to make sure that you educate yourself with a registered investor or investment professional before you take investment of any kind, as neither Luis nor I are that. But when you are ready to go, make sure you check out FTX. Also, the show's brought to you by you via the Patreon. It's patreon.com/limited resources. You get access to the Patreon feed and a whole bunch of stuff, including no matter what level you come in at, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail as well. And we want to thank everybody over on the Patreon for that. It's patreon.com/limited resources. Luis, before we get into the topics, you know, for the Sunset Show, we of course have to do our last Crack-A-Pack. Our last Crimson Vow Crack-A-Pack. And I just happen to have a pack in my hand here, so let's do this. All right, our first card out, Nurturing Presence. Can you even tell me what this card does?
It's 2 and a green. You can put it on a creature and give the creature +2/+2, or put it on a land and the land taps for 2 green instead.
This is a different card than that one. I know the card you're thinking of. This is the white one.
This is the 1 and a white one that makes a 1/1 flyer, and then the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for every time a creature comes into play.
That is correct. We actually thought for just a brief window that this card might be a thing, but it ended up kind of not being a thing.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but true.
Next card was always going to be a thing. It's a braid. So there's our first pick currently. Love that one. Oh, God. We're going to talk about this card later. Stupid Cradle of Safety. I'll save you for later, Cradle of Safety. Unholy Officiant. This is the white 1/2 vampire with vigilance, and you can pay 4 and a white to put a counter on it. Felt like it was going to kind of be able to straddle a couple of different archetypes. And also, we've really trained our audience and ourselves to look at the 1-drops really carefully, because a lot of times some of the best commons are actually 1 mana these days. This one had the hallmarks of it, but ended up being a total flop. It basically doesn't see any play.
Yeah, it's always cool when they make 1-drops that do cool things. This was just ended up being not quite there cost wise.
It's just an efficiency thing, right? Like the 5 mana, the low stats.
Yeah.
Yep.
At the end of the day, the power level just wasn't there.
Right. I heard you like removal. How about a Bleed Dry?
Yeah, Bleed Dry's great. You basically never felt bad picking it. There's this tier of common where when you have to first pick it, you still feel okay with the situation. Bleed Dry definitely fits into that category.
Yeah. So we've got a Braid and Bleed Dry already. Sheltering Bows, whatever. I still don't know how to say that. Grisly Ritual. That's the you don't want to, but sometimes one of them makes it into your deck. Removal. Militia Rallier. I play this card a lot. This is 2 and a white 3/3. It can't attack alone, but when it does attack, you untap a creature.
It's fine. Yeah.
Butter. Here's a card I know you like, Voldaren Epicure. So going back to the 1-drop discussion, here's one that got there.
Yeah, I think Voldaren Epicure actually really got there, and I was always surprisingly happy playing it, even after you look at the Epicure, and our initial impression, as we're going to talk about, was not very positive. I mean, it just didn't look that strong, but it turns out it actually is great. A one mana cards really just shouldn't be underestimated, and it turns out that the total package you got here was enough that you are very happy playing this card.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that these 2 cards, the Unholy Officiant and the Voldaren Epicure, these to me are a really good encapsulation of where Limited is at right now. There's a big focus on 1-drops and how important they are to the format. And also, they're hard. They are difficult. Even though they're only 1 mana, they're putting a lot of text on these cards, and they are difficult to grade. I mean, at first glance, these look maybe roughly comparable. Maybe even the Officiant's a little better. Who knows, depending on like the context and stuff. And it ended up being not remotely close. The Epicure is like one of the best red commons, and the Officiant was unplayable. So, there's a very, very fine line there. And we have, again, trained ourselves to look at these 1-drops closer. And that's why, because it's so close between being a format-defining card and a card that doesn't even see play. Hookhand Mariner is next. I like this one. That's the 4 mana 4/4 that flips into a 6/4.
Yeah, that one ended up being a little bit underrated, actually. It's funny. Part of it, when you're going from one set to another, effects of the previous set always have a bit of an effect on you, right?
Yeah.
And I think with Hookhand Mariner, which is why I bring this up, the werewolves in the previous set were pretty bad. They were overall just not impressive. Hookhand Mariner looks a lot like those kind of dorky Midnight Hunt werewolves. Turns out it's just not. It's just a good card. And it ended up being efficiently costed enough that you wanted that card in your deck. It was one of the better green commons.
It's really funny because I think it actually is, like, I think it would fit perfectly into Midnight Hunt and get mowed down like every other werewolf in that set. And I think if we took some of the werewolves from Midnight Hunt and put them in this set of similar, cost and stuff, they would actually do fine. I think the context really mattered. There's not 2 different or even 3 different black removal spells that cost even 2 and 3 mana respectively at instant speed that just mow down the Mariner no matter what side it's on or what it's doing. Where here, you Bleed Dry. Okay. You're going to trade your 4 mana premium removal for my 4 mana random common. Fine with that. A Braid doesn't kill it, right? Like, it just has the ability to survive better. But that hangover that you talked about was huge. This is probably the 2-set combo where I've seen it the most, where it was just hard to get to reset our brains to go, no, this is not that set. Like, dorky beefy ground werewolves are actually fine in this set, where in the last one they were basically a liability. Uncommons. Blood Hypnotist is our first one. That's the 2 and a red 3/3 that can't block. And whenever you sack a blood token, you can make a creature not be able to block once per turn.
Yeah, I liked Blood Hypnotist. This was pretty good in the like red, black, blood aggressive decks. And really any aggressive deck is happy for a 3/3 for 3 with additional abilities. Even being unable to block really isn't that huge of a drawback when you're the one who's going to be attacking.
Yeah, you just need to be aggressive. This card, man, this next one's a type of card that just missed enough, but it's still around. It's Storm Chaser Drake. That's the 1 in a blue 2/1 with flying. And whenever it becomes a target of a spell you control, you draw a card.
Well, I mean, I think it was a good card.
Me too. Like, I played it every time, but it felt like it had real potential, and it was just sort of a random value.
It did never pop off in the way that you're talking about. Like, you never ended up being like, wow, Storm Chaser Drake, this is the engine that's going to make my deck go, right? Like that never did happen.
Yeah, but it's still a good card, like you said. Would you take it, though, over Abrade or Bleed Dry or Epicure?
I think I would just take Bleed Dry out of this pack.
Yeah.
Like, so far. I don't know. Bleed Dry, it's just really hard to miss on Bleed Dry, you know?
Right, and it really is a critical card, too, because there are quite a few. The fact that it exiles ends up being relevant in a lot of spots, and the fact that it kills any creature in the set, of course, is why you're going to pay the 4 mana. I really like this next card. It's Child of the Pack. This is the 2 red green 2/5, and you can pay 2 red green to make a 2/2, and it flips into a 5/5 Trampler.
Oh, Child of the Pack was just an awesome card to play with. Yeah. I think that you should still probably lead on Bleed Dry just because it's a monocolor card. Or even a Bray. Well, I don't know. That's a little closer. I would probably still lead on Bleed Dry here, but I wouldn't really fault you for taking Child of the Pack.
Yeah, I mean, I think my honest answer is that, like, if I had a draft in front of me, I would take Child of the Pack at this point. If I was in, day 2 of a thing we used to call a GP or, God forbid, a Pro Tour, if you remember what those were, I think I would take Bleed Dry. I'd want to reduce that risk if I could. Our last rare of the set, is it one of the many bombs? No. It is Change of Fortune. This is the 3 in a red sorcery. Discard your hand and draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn.
So you remember when I kind of made fun of Ice Age for having 3 different cards that changed land types and how that was outrageous?
Yeah.
How many red spells do you have that let you discard your hand to draw that many cards do you need in a set? Because this set's got 2 of them.
Yeah, I think 1 might be too many, but we can accept it, but 2 is way over. So yeah, so my honest pick here is I would take the Child of Night here, or Child of, what is it called? Child of the Pack.
Child of the Pack.
Yeah, that's what I would take. What would you go for if you had an arena draft in front of you right now?
I would take Child of the Pack as well, but like you said, if I was in day 2 of a Grand Prix, I would take Bleed Dry.
What's a Grand Prix? That doesn't sound like a real thing. Okay, let's get into it. If you could summarize, by the way, Luis wrote his summary in first, and he nailed it so hard, I'm not even going to type my own. If you could summarize the set in 1 sentence, what would it be?
Bombs and blood, because those are those were the 2 really things that stood out the most for the set. The bombs, of course, being something we're going to talk about during the show, of you really just had a really large percentage, more than, meaningfully more than most sets of rares and mythics that are like a bomb, like A level cards. And that kind of impacted everyone's experience of the set. Like, it's the sort of thing where you might not notice if you drafted it 3 times, but if you drafted it 5 or 10, you definitely would. And if you drafted it like 30, then it was just a huge factor. Basically, once the rares hit a certain level, like percentage wise, and in this set, it was, close to it was something like a third of the rares and mythics, a quarter to a third, depending on where you wanted to draw the line exactly, were really, really strong. I had something like 22 or 24 out of 80 as like, you have to play this in sealed. And there's even cards outside that, which were still very strong. And the downside to that is that it really makes you feel like the games where you played well and your opponent played well and you both played these cards, like these commons, and you were both trying to, do your best. And the game goes back and forth, and then one of you plays a Tox roll or a Dreadface Demon or whatever, and it kind of invalidates the game. That experience is like, if that happens too often, it makes you feel like you have too many non-games. I think this set was on the high end of that, and that was most people's like first knock against the set. The rest of the set, well, Blood was the loudest mechanic because it was a new type. It was like clues, and Blood played out great. I actually think that was the best part of the set. So I'll go a little more in depth into like, kind of talking about the design discussion in later that we do. But Bombs and Blood, the two things that stood out the most for me for Crimson Vow.
Yeah, and that's, that kind of covers the ups and the downs, and not entirely, as you mentioned. We'll talk about the other mechanics down the line here. What turned out to be the best archetypes?
Red Black Vamps, I think, was the overall best. Red Green Werewolves was very good. Blue White Spirits, I thought was quite strong.
Yeah. I liked Blue Red quite a bit, though you couldn't get it quite as consistently. It was type of one that, if open, was very, very strong, but it wasn't, you needed the right parts.
Yeah, and I think that those were like the mainstays of the format. Like the white-green deck didn't come together very much. Like Training ended up being kind of a bust. Black-white life gain, I think, was in the mid-range. It was fine.
Agreed.
Didn't. It was kind of like the blue-red deck. If it came together, it was good. Didn't always come together.
Blue-black
and then most
exploit.
of the other, like blue-black and blue-green, I didn't feel were that great. Like it to this set's credit, every color pair was draftable in some way. You could string together any two color. Like if in some formats where like, hey, what did you draft? And you're like, oh, I drafted white green. You're like, ooh, all right, let me take a look, but I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like that in this set. If you told me you drafted white black, I'm like, oh, cool, let me see your deck. Oh, did you draft blue green? Well, let me see why you drafted blue green. That was like one of the worst ones.
I think that was the worst. I think that was the only one that I would put into that range where if somebody came up to me in an event and said, hey, I drafted a deck, what'd you draft? And they said blue green, I'd be like, okay, like I've seen builds of this that can work, but you really need a reason, right? Like it doesn't just come together naturally if you just draft a bunch of blue and green cards where, like you mentioned, red, black vampires. If you just drafted quality red and black cards, all of a sudden you had that deck. Like, hey, there's removal, there's threats. Sure, you could lean it a little more aggro, a little more mid-range. Blue-green's not like that. Like you could have a real mess on your hands if you didn't, follow a pretty strict path. All the others, though, I felt were, playable at least.
Yeah, that's not all downside. It can be fun to be like, oh, normally blue-green's not great, but I got there on blue-green and I'm pretty happy about it. This deck's wild.
Totally. And to do something, it also, I think you brought this up a couple of minutes ago, but it's something that, our audience and us are probably a little desensitized to, but that really does matter is, what are these sets how many drafts should a set be fun for? Right? Because our bar is 150, right? But we're not average consumers. Our audience, though, skews towards that range rather than 3, right?
For what it's worth, I think 150 is a little on the high end. I think if a draft set is fun for 50 drafts, I think it is a success.
Okay.
For me.
And I'll be clear, if it's fun for 50, it probably is going to be fun for 100 and 150. I was trying to pick like a kind of absurd number, but 50 is a good benchmark.
Is like 25.
Do you think they're aiming for 20?
Oh, I have no idea what they're aiming for. I could believe that if they think someone drafts 5 times, that's on the high end. I don't know. Okay. I don't know what their metrics are. They know so much better than we do that and I assume that, that's information transmitted to the design team where it's like, hey, the average arena player who has done at least one draft tends to do 3 drafts in a set. I'd also believe the average arena player who does at least one draft does, 7 drafts. Mm-hmm. I would be hard pressed to imagine the average is like anywhere in like the double digits. Because the drafts cost money.
Totally. And when you get hooked and you kind of start looping it, it's one thing. But when it's like not your main hobby, right? When it's a thing that you like to do every, it's Friday, I'll fire up a draft. I know a lot of our audience is like that as well. Where it's not, they don't play every day, right? And that's pretty common. The next question I have though is you can have both, right? Like you can have a draft set be really fun for the first 5 drafts and kind of, open up a world to you and be really resonant and, kind of leave a mark in your mind where you're like, that was fun. That was cool. but also just have it be great for 50, right?
Yeah,
like,
I think
like there's no like you don't have to give up one for the other necessarily.
No,
right?
I mean the best formats have both those things.
Right.
It's good you don't have to give up one for the other, because let me tell you, we would not be happy.
Right. Totally.
like we already see that with organized play and stuff like that, because that is drawing from the same pool. Luckily, I think things that make great draft formats 25 drafts in also make for great draft formats 2 drafts in.
Yeah. And so hopefully that's, kind of what we keep seeing going forward. That's how it's been. Generally speaking, these draft sets have been great. Even this one, which wasn't one of my favorites, was pretty good. We'll talk about that later too. Let's rewind all the way back to the set review. What were some of the cards that we were most wrong about, or maybe even just that surprised us, one way or the other?
Let's talk about the Epic here. Let's get cooking.
Yeah.
Voldaren Epic here is just a lesson that enough small things, especially for 1 mana, really do add up to enough. How good would this card have been if it didn't deal the damage? I don't know, but it does deal the damage, and that does matter. And there's some cards that proc on dealing damage, and it's like, wow, this is a great card for that. So Voldaren Epic here definitely overperformed. We've got training cards. Cards with training ended up underperforming. I'm going to put this more on the execution side. It's not, I don't know. It's tough because a 3-mana 2/1 flying with training sounds like a great way to display the mechanic. A 2-mana 1/2 that moves its counters around seems fine. So maybe train is just a tough mechanic to pull off, not a great one. Because
I feel it's just fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah. The issue being that if you're a game designer and you're like, okay, I want to make a mechanic, but this mechanic only applies to half of half of our game. Basically, limited is about attacking and blocking, right? And it only applies to attacking. If you are in a defensive stance, if you do not have an attack, if attacking isn't where you want to be, training, just erase all of it, right? It does not apply anymore. And that's very, very difficult spot, because the natural conclusion would be, okay, well then we need to incentivize you to attack by making training even better. But if you make it too good, right, then somebody curves out with the training deck, and even if the other person has an answer or has a blocker, it won't matter. And then training ends up being too good. So you have to push it right to that tipping point without pushing it over. And I mean, I don't know how you could expect to hit that exact limit, on a whole mechanic. Like maybe with one card you could get there, but I mean, how many cards have training in the set? It's one of the marquee mechanics for the set, and that just seems like too much to bite off. These mechanics that are combat based are notoriously difficult to pull off.
Yeah, maybe training just wasn't where it was at, because I'm looking at the common training cards, and they really were, I think, about what you would design if you were designing training cards. I don't think that the blame can be placed on the designs, which makes me feel like it's the mechanic. It's
also a difficult mechanic in that it's meant to start low and then build up, but that means that like your aggressive creatures have to have low power, right? Like, my aggressive 2-drop has 1 power, right?
Yeah.
And that can change. I get it. But I'm saying like that isn't even good at face value, so now you're adding this additional setup cost to make the card good as well. Very, very fine line. And I don't really blame them. Like you said, these designs all seem perfectly reasonable. They seemed even powerful enough, but I really do think that when you make mechanics that are attacking based, that is just a really, really fine line to walk, and it's probably just too hard to do. What about your favorite card, the Entomber?
So we've got Bride's Gown and Groom's Finery.
You want to start with that one, do you?
So this equipment pair just wasn't. It just wasn't feasible. Like they weren't good by themselves. They were great together, but equipment pairing with other equipment is already just asking for trouble. Because even if putting both of these on a creature was very good, which it was, you still run into, all right, well, I guess I'll bleed dry your creature that you spent 8 mana playing equipments on.
Gives me shudders.
Not counting
right?
the creature's cost.
Yeah, and I missed on these, not horribly, but definitely was off. I overrated them because I saw 2 mana, because I didn't care about having both of them. I thought that would like basically never happen, and it basically never happened. But I just thought, you know what? This is playable. Like, it's 2 mana, 2 to equip, and it does the thing that you want for your aggressive deck. It gives your creature a power bump. And in fact, it was +2/+0, right? And I'm like, look, I didn't give these a B or something, but I thought you could put these in your deck. But you were kind of onto it, like, if that's all you're getting, I'm not quite into it. Like, remember, I brought up the like Bone Splitter, or not Bone Splitter, whatever the old school equipment was that was just like equip, give +2/+0. You know, I thought you could put that in your deck, and this isn't, you know, for these colors, that's roughly that. But it didn't end up being, they just weren't. I don't know what would need to happen to make them worth it. Maybe just lower the equip cost. But it turns out even at 2, it was just a little too much. Also, there was no payoffs for equipment, right? I mean, outside of the other half of this particular pair, but you know, it wasn't like the last set where there was cards that actually cared about equipment and stuff. There just wasn't anything like that too.
Yes. Next we got Diver Scob, which looked like a very strong exploit creature. And this is kind of like training. I don't really blame this on it's the reverse though. I don't blame this on the mechanic. I think we saw how Exploit played in Dragons of Tarkir. It was a great deck. I made top 8 at a Grand Prix drafting Exploit, and you know, it was like, wow, I got a good blue-black Exploit deck. I'm stoked. Mm-hmm. Diver Scob would have been great if Exploit was good in the set. It just turns out the cards that Exploit was on, like the other cards, the enablers, just the format in general, didn't line up for it to be good.
That's right. Yeah, because Diver Scob's one of those classics where if you're getting a card back, which you kind of are here, and or affecting the board, that tends to be the line for exploit. Like if you can exploit to make another creature or exploit to take out one of their creatures, then it's worth it to sacrifice some board presence or some fodder for it. But if you're just exploiting for like even a card worth of value but doesn't affect the board, or some other resource that doesn't really affect the board itself, you can fall behind really, really quickly, you know, like, cause sometimes you don't draw exactly the fodder for the card, and then, you know, away it goes.
We've also got Falconwrath Celebrants. So this is the 5 mana.
You're not getting away from it. You can keep talking about the other ones, but we're going back to it.
I think we've got a list. We made the show notes. We're sticking to the show notes. Falconwrath Celebrants. It looked like it's 5 mana, 4/4 menace, and it makes 2 blood tokens on ETB. This card was closer to Muldrifter than it was to whatever it is we thought during the set review.
Totally.
So
it was awesome.
Love this card. And this card also was the card that specifically invalidated Pyrespawn and other 6 mana plays for me, because when I had this card, I just wanted to stay on 5. Maybe I'd hit my 6th land drop if I had enough going on, but most of the time, all the blood tokens really push you to wanting your curve to end at a lower number than at most decks.
Right. And I remember you queued into that really early, right? Where you kind of 5 was usually ended up being, I remember on your streams where you were like, look, if you open some insane bomb, you know, the 6 mana 6/6, you know, that makes blood, you would play it. But you were looking for an excuse to try to stay on 5 if you could. And that way you could just blood token away any lands in addition and not find yourself in the unenviable position of blood tokening away a land only to draw a card that costs 1 more than the amount of mana that you had.
And then lastly, we've got Glorious Sunrise. This was the 5 mana rare that we spent quite a bit of time debating, and I think ended up being quite good. I thought this card was fantastic.
Fantastic? Come on.
It was a bomb.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was.
All right, let me find out where it lands. To the numbers.
To the numbers? All right.
Yeah. What is it called? Glorious Sunrise?
Glorious Sunrise. Oh, like, wow, it's the 4th best green card in terms of win percentage. I don't have 17 lands open. I don't know.
it's not that high. I was like, oh no, is it really? I do have it open, and it is, let's see. It's pretty good. It's got a 60.2% win percentage. That puts
60% is great.
About top 20, 25. It's just ahead of Biolume Egg and just behind Concealing Curtains.
Yeah, that's quite good.
It's pretty good. It is not fantastic. I don't remember. I felt like that was one of the ones where we talked a lot and then had the same grade or had a really similar grade. Is that true?
I think I liked it a lot more than you did.
You did.
That's all I remember.
I think you were too high on it then and too high on it now.
If it's a top 25 card in the set, that can't be true.
Well, I don't know.
It's in the top 10% of the set.
It's fine.
All right. What were
I never got to play it, by the way.
Oh, well, that probably informs your decision a little bit.
I would have. I just never opened the damn thing. I don't know why.
What were the most underrated cards?
No. Easy. Selhoff and Tumor. That was the card that we really went at it over. Oh, hold on. Let's just get the win percentage on Selhoff and Tumor. Coming in at a cool 52.7% is
all right.
Selhoff and Tumor, which I think you gave a B plus, right?
I think I gave this a C plus.
Okay, and I gave it an F.
Yeah, and it was closer to a D than either of those grades.
Okay, you would give it a D?
Yeah, I'd probably give it a D. Yeah,
I'd still give it an F. I never put it in my deck. Maybe the only saving grace for it that I could see is the blue-green deck. Because it actually wants creatures in the yard for a few different cards that are common payoffs or whatever. But come on, you can't discard creatures to your looter. That's the whole point of a looter, is to find more creatures with your, lands and stuff. I'm a little skeptical that you'd really give it a D.
Yeah, I would. I played this in a couple decks. In your really creature-heavy decks, it was still okay.
Okay.
Especially, there were some decks that had a lot of raised dead effects, and this is a way to stock your graveyard.
Okay. All right. We'll buy it. Let's move on to underrated cards. Definitely underrated was Flourishing Hunter. This card actually ended up creeping in the discussion for best green common. We're going to go over the best common by color in a little bit, and it didn't win for us, but it is right there. Probably the second best. Some people will even consider it the first best. And we love these cards, right? I mean, we even talked about it on the set review. All of these honey badgers or whatever, these stupid cards that come down, they're big, they're dumb, they're green, and they gain you life and stabilize you. That really matters.
Yeah. These cards, cards like this are what we point to when we say that the Magic limited set design has a little bit of paint by numbers feel to it recently. It's they found best practices. The upside of that is the best practices are there for a reason. These sets are consistently pretty good. They're not as loose as they used to be, which cuts off, like I mentioned before, cuts off the low end, but also cuts off some of the high end.
Totally.
But, that's fine. We generally know that the 6-mana green 6/6 that gains you life is pretty good, and it was good in this set. They always look kind of unimpressive too.
Yes, they always do. Those ones they always sneak through. Massive Might, really good, efficient spell, and an easy way to lose a game is to forget that this card exists and throw a 1/1 in front of a 4/4, and then oops, you're dead.
Definitely.
Ceremonial Knife. This was one that I can't remember how we felt about it on the set review, but it was pretty early that we recognized this card's pretty good. I remember you were playing a couple of these in decks really early.
Yeah, and I got to give credit to the Lords of Limited guys and Court of Calls. They were, in their typical fashion. I heard the words Umezawa's Jitet thrown around once, and that was a bit much for me. But they were on this one early too. And it's funny, the timeline of sets these days. It used to be we do our set review, then we do our rare set review, then the set comes out, and then a week later, we do first impressions, and now it's by the time we finish the common review, the set comes out then, right afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we do the rare review, I'm already all right, well, we were wrong on these 10 cards, and these 10 cards are better than they look, and you just get to play so much now. But Ceremonial Knife did not take long to
No, but I will say that over the course of the format, I came down on it back to kind of where we started. I played it a lot early, and near the end, I didn't play it nearly as much. I don't know what changed, but I felt like it underperformed the more I played. Did you feel that way, or were you still pretty?
I came down on it a little, but I thought it was still solid. Yeah.
Okay. Chill of the Grave. I love that card. Probably, irrationally so, but I put that card in a lot of decks. I felt like it was free-ish, you know what I mean? It replaces itself.
Kind of was.
Yeah, it binds up a creature. And then if you could get any type of additional upside from it at all, then I was happy. Blue-red, obviously the best spot for it, because you could get triggers from your creatures. But even in something as simple as like a blue-white deck with a bunch of flyers, like it just overperforms there because they'll usually only have one blocker with like reach or flying that you really care about. And if you can take it out for 2 turn cycles, two combat cycles, that's usually enough to win the game. So I would up it in basically all of those decks. There were a few where it was, you know, a little less of a performer, but I still ran it. Like even if I was blue-black, I still ran the card.
Well, this card was free in terms of cards, right? Because it replaced itself. But I also argue that unlike a lot of cantrips, this was kind of free mana-wise as well, because tapping down a creature for an extra turn is kind of gets you that 3 mana back in terms of you spent a turn not developing your board, but they also weren't able to attack you on that turn, and it maybe even stopped them from doing 2 attacks or 2 blocks, and that ends up kind of paying for itself in that sense.
Right. What else? Reckless Impulse.
Yeah, this was the one in the red where you exile your top 2 cards. You can play them till your end of your next turn. Little mini light up the stage where it split the difference. No discount, but it always costs 2, and it was good. It was a card that basically this alongside Voldaren Epicure. I think one of the first decks I drafted on stream was like a bunch of Reckless Impulses, Epicures, and cheap red and black cards. And I was like, wow, this deck's great.
Really good. You never run out of gas and they're all cheap. You can cast everything. And yeah, Diregraph Scavenger was one that looked pretty good and ended up being a real performer in the format. That card's another combination. You know, this one reminds me of the Epicure. You're paying 4 mana, so you're getting more, but it's like each thing is just like the fact that it has Death Touch, the fact that it has a 3rd toughness, the fact that it exiles something, the life gain out of it, like each little checkbox brings it just up to like, hey, this thing's really good.
Yeah. And this was like a little mini Vampire Nighthawk here.
Yeah, sure. I'll buy that. What were the most controversial cards? I know one of them, V1 really for us was Boarded Window.
so Boarded Window is kind of the perfect trap. I actually kind of love the design here. So if you don't remember, this is the 3 mana artifact that says attacking creatures your opponent's control get -1, -0 when they're attacking you. So all the creatures that are attacking you are -1, -0. But if you ever take 4 or more damage total in a turn, at your end step, you sack the Boarded Window. And this is a card where like, well, you know, cards that do this are often underrated, and this ability is really powerful, deceptively good, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, the Lords love this card. I remember, you know, them talking it up big. And, you know, this card is the perfect trap for people who remember how good these cards are in other situations. And it turned out this card was horrendous. Like it had like a 43% win percentage at one point.
Literally 43% win percentage still, by the way. And you have to
no one's played it since then.
Well, yeah, and you have to remember that that's factored in for the people who play on 17 lands, who they're better than average. So the average card on there has a higher than 50% win percentage. So this is like pushing 10% below the average. It is horrible, like really terrible card. And I still love it. I mean, I read it and I'm like, I want to run it. I want to, you know, maybe if I get 2 of them, that, you know, that'll solve all my problems. How would I have 4 of them? You know, now I'm in business. But yeah, that ended up easily being the most controversial card because some people, as you mentioned, were very high on it early and it ended up being real bad. We were hoping that during the showdown that they would draft it, remember? But they figured it out by then already. Really,
yeah. By then they had it kind of well set up.
Super annoying. What was your favorite artwork in the set?
I liked Lantern Bearer. I thought Lantern Bearer by Zoltan Boros was really sweet.
Which one is? Oh yeah. No, that one's really really good. I have 2 answers for this. I guess I'll just go with the one that. It's the creepiest and it's Gutter Skulker. And it's like, it's by Vico Menezes. And it's got this like, I don't even want to say it because it just makes me feel like scared, like I was 11 years old again. But it reminds me of the movie It, where there's like a clown and the stupid gutter thing. This one's like a ghost that's not nearly as scary as a clown, but I kind of like the callback there for Gutter Skulker, so that's the one that I'm gonna pick. Not that I really want to look at it that much. It's just I appreciate the art. What were the best build-arounds in this set?
Necroduality was actually really good. It was a mythic rare, so it didn't come up too often.
Yeah.
But doubling all your zombies, I definitely had some sick losses to that. And
definitely.
And it was really fun when it came together.
I mean, the card was really legitimately powerful if you built around it. I mean, seriously great. Like if you went blue-black zombies, it was awesome.
Yeah. And Kessig Flame Breather was also a pretty good one.
Yeah.
This is the 2-mana 1/3 that when you played a spell, pinged your opponent for 1. It actually added up. When your opponent had 2 of these out, you kind of felt like you were on a big clock.
Yes. It ended, this is where the Chill of the Grave start really adding up quickly. And this is just a common. And, this card also saw play outside of the blue-red deck, but that was where it was like, wow, that's really annoying if they get the second one down. What else?
Restless Bloodseeker. So this is the 1/3 that flipped. If you sack 2, you could sack 2 bloods to flip it, and it made a blood every turn if you gain life that turn.
Mm-hmm.
And then it flipped into a 3/3 to start draining them. It turned out this card you could put in almost any black deck, which I thought was pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's really good. This is the one that also it has the 4 and a black, drain them for 2.
Yeah,
right?
and so you could play the cool thing, and this is build-arounds that do this. I think it's funny. You want a bunch of different categories of build-arounds. You want the hard build-arounds that you like don't often get there, but when you do, they're amazing. Necroduality is kind of like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to have like a mediocre Necroduality. You're either a Necroduality deck or you're not. And then there's cards like Restless Bloodseeker, which you can make basically any black deck work with Bloodseeker, but you do have to put some effort into it. So it's not just completely free, but it's a lot more achievable. And I thought this set did pretty well on build-arounds, when you look at those metrics.
Yeah, Brinecomber was a pretty good one, right? Like it was a strong card.
The blue-white one that whenever you put auras on your creatures, you got 1/1 flyers, and it would disturb to an aura that did that. It just really helped that blue-white deck kind of pop off and play those nurturing presences, and just really you could do some impressive stuff. When you my favorite way to start a draft was like 2 Brinecombers. You just felt like this is going to be great. Yeah,
because it was good enough on its own, to be fine, and then it could pop off. Another card that did see enough build-around play to make the list was Ancient Lumberknot. That was a 2 black-green 1/4. And it basically made each creature you control with toughness greater than its power assign that toughness instead of power in combat.
Yeah, little door in.
Yeah, like a little door in. And there was just enough support for these types of cards where, you could play the 1/4 with reach in green. And of course, the 1/13 was kind of the big payoff because you could play this into that. It had EDB tap, but it got to untap and slam with a 13/13. And it made the Lumberknot a card like you actually needed to kill, which I thought was cool. Like to me, that hit a really nice sweet spot. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't amazing, but it was build aroundable enough that it popped up from time to time in the format. And if you understood the format, you could keep your eye out for cards like that, or maybe even wheel one and take something better. The Catapult was pretty good on its own, but excellent in that deck as well. That to me is a really good example of a just supported enough archetype where they hit it. It's a thing, but it doesn't dominate, which I think is a really nice. You need a bunch of those to make a good set. Which card still looks good when you read it, but just doesn't see play? Definitely for me, Diver Scob is still on that list. I mean, it's not that it saw 0 play, but it is just not a sought after card, and you didn't see it draft in and draft out. Nobody really cared about it. And for the reasons we described before, but I still read it and I'm just like, this should be good. Like how did this miss? Right. It's like, you should have something to sack to it and it should do well, but it just didn't.
Yeah, I think that's less, like I mentioned, less on Diver Scob specifically and more on the kind of the setting it finds itself in. But I do agree with you. The card, not doesn't see a whole lot of play. For me, it was Howling Moon. This is the rare enchantment that when they play 2 spells, you get a 2/2 and it pumps one of your wolves and werewolves +1 or +2/+2 at the beginning of combat.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't think the card was good when we first saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I tried drafting a couple decks because I'm like, I bet in all werewolf decks, this is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I had it was actually day 2 of the Arena Open. I had a red-green werewolves deck with all werewolves and wolves, 2 of these, and it still wasn't good enough. So kind of disappointing. It's just this looked to me like one of those rare build runs that if you really got there, that it could actually deliver. And it turns out, even if you really get there, it just doesn't quite get there for you.
Yeah. A little too easy to play around for the opponent. And, again, it does suffer from the fact that it only affects your turn. So, if you're blocking, it doesn't do anything. This is an easy one. Was this a Prince or a Pauper format?
Yeah. This is a Prince format. This is verging on a King format, where you end up with basically rares being not just it's not, winning's not the best thing. It's the only thing or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. You come with the King, you best not miss. This was very princely.
Definitely.
Yeah. We knew that straight away from the set review where we handed out A's like Halloween candy, and it played out that way too. It didn't mean that the format was bad, but you felt it for sure. What's the it's a bad card, but I love it anyway award for you?
I think Vampire's Kiss. This is the one that drains them for 2 and puts a blood into play. I played this card every now and then, and I thought it was okay, but I don't think it was great. I guess you get 2 blood tokens. Sorry, but I just enjoyed playing with the card. It gave me a lot of card velocity, even though I know you are down a card ultimately.
Yeah. Speaking of, this is one of my, not one of my favorite cards like on the short list, but it's a card that I've traditionally really liked. And I wonder if you even remember it's in the set. It's Mulch. 1 and a green sorcery.
That's the blue-green enabler.
The engine, right? And it was so horrendously bad in this set that in a week you could have said, was Mulch in this set? I would have been like, no, was it? You would have handed me the card and I'd be like, okay, I guess it's Mulch then. Oh God, I don't even know if I can do this. Luis, brings back bad memories. I literally never won with it, but it always seems to beat me card. Ugh, Cradle of Safety. Hate that
Mr.
card.
Metronome got you good on that one.
Yeah, I got blown out in the stupid showdown thing with it. It's actually a fine card. There's many decks that want a creature to protect, and if they can, it trades with the removal spell and keeps your advantage on board. I just never, whenever I ventured into those waters and played it, it was just it would sit in my hand or it really wouldn't do anything. But every time I'm like, all right, well, I saved up my 6 mana for this stupid removal spell for your bomb, and they're like Cradle, and it's just it's so devastating when that happens. Mana wise, card wise, your whole turn goes away. And you know how the bombs are in this format. You have to kill them. If you don't, you lose. And yeah, I lost to it. I hate
for me, Curse of Hospitality was one that was pretty rough.
Which one is that?
It's the
white one?
You put it on your opponent. It's the red one. Your creatures have trample.
Oh yeah.
And whenever one of your creatures deals damage to them, you get to Reckless Impulse a card off the top of their library. Exile it. You can play it. And I don't think the card's good, but I've had multiple people just play this when they had one of them was blue red and had Lantern Bearer and played this on and was just went to town on my deck. And the other was red, green, white with a bunch of giant creatures, and it actually ended up losing to it. So yeah,
I have lost to that card too. That's a great answer. And by the way, I looked it up real quick and it's really bad. We gave it a really bad grade in the review and we got some flack for it. We were right. It only got 48.3% win percentage. And again, that's factoring for average being, 53 or whatever. So that is very, very bad. What was my opponent played this card, so now I must win or quit Magic forever.
So for that, I've got Radiant Grace. This is the aura that gives a creature +1/+1 vigilance. And then when the creature dies, it flips into an enchantment on them, which makes it so their creatures all enter the battlefield tapped.
Yes. Wow. That's a perfect answer. At some point it did become Boarded Window. It certainly didn't start off that way, but that was the card that ended up getting there for me. If they played it later after we figured out how bad it was. What was the biggest grown test? What was the overrun of this set? And there were a lot of choices for cards like that.
The real answer is just most cards with a rare mythic symbol. The thing that took you from a game you thought you were winning or you were, this game's close, was just they just played a 5-mana rare or whatever, and now the game's over. specifically, I want to call it Ill-Tempered Loner, the 3/3 for 4 that reflects all the damage dealt to it. But when it flips, it reflects all the damage dealt to any of their creatures.
Yes.
That's the kind of card where they're like, play it, go. You're like, wow, I can't kill that. Okay, let's see what happens here. Next turn, they're just like, go. And you're like, all right. And then if you can't do something, then they just attack with everything and you lose.
Yes. And that is really the power in that card. Definitely on the list for sure. A card, this one is, there's two cards that came up. Both of them are big hitters as far as raw power level goes, but it is kind of the way that they go about it. And there's two different ways that I was like, oh God, every time they cast it. The easy one is Wedding Announcement. This ended up being one of the best cards in the set, but it's a funny card because it's only 3 mana. It's a little slow. It spits out a couple of tokens, or maybe they get a card or two back off of it. You know, oftentimes it was better just to have the tokens. And it just never, you're always like, why can't I beat this card? Like, it doesn't do that much, but it did do that much. And you always ended up losing to it down the road because they would still just continue to curve out and then have these huge creatures. So it was like one of those cards where it was like, it hits the battlefield and you're definitely not dead right now, but you're going to be in 3 or 4 turns. And it's just, you have to sit here and kind of go through the motions. And then the other one, and probably one of the most frustrating cards, in recent memory, just kind of full stop, is the, not knowing the names of these cards, really cool. Averbrook Caretaker.
Oh yeah.
Right. Because this is the type of card, you know, that at least I just can't stand. It has hexproof, and it's just like, this card's, you know, nearly unbeatable and limited, and it has hexproof. It's just like, it just doesn't fit, right? Like, you should be able to kill your opponent's creatures if you have one of your good removal spells in hand, or you've managed that properly, and you just can't with this. So that was definitely a groan test. It's like playing a normal game, a little bit of a stalemate, Averbrook Caretaker, go. You're like, okay, well, never mind. And then the game ends. And that's also, by the way, the type of card that you could flip your whole entire deck over and not have an answer for. And that's, to me, you know, where the line gets drawn. What was the bombiest bomb?
I mean, there's a couple, you know, Wedding Announcement definitely on that list. Halana and Alina, Toxrill. I really want to call out specifically the cards like Wedding Announcement and Halana and Alina because they cost 3 and 4 mana.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, you have the experience, right, where your opponent in game 1 plays like a 7 mana unbeatable card like Toxrill, and you're just like, damn it. You're playing best of 3, right? You're playing on the Arena Open Day 2. You really care about winning this match. You're like, well, I hope I can kill them before they get to 7 mana, or play a counter spell, or make them discard it, or they don't draw it, whatever. When they play like a Wedding Announcement, it's like, well, I can't really counter it. It's a 3 mana spell. My discard's got to get there real fast. They're not going to not hit 3 lands to play it. Like, what are you hoping for in those situations, you know?
Totally. And Hana and Elena affecting the board so immediately. Number 1 was Toxrill, though, right? This is one of the best examples we've had of a card that if it hits the battlefield, you're basically going to win. You know, it triggers on your own end step, so there's a very tiny window there for them to kill it if they happen to have a bleed dry, but otherwise not. And if they don't have a removal spell for it, which a lot of the removal doesn't kill it at 7 toughness, you know, it decimates the board and completely dominates. So to me, that was the one. Toxrill's the one. What was the best common for each color?
White is pretty easy. Traveling Minister.
We love that
like
card.
no one was surprised by this. I think everyone was like, "Yep, Traveling Minister looks fantastic," and yeah, it was. For blue, Lantern Bearer was very good as well.
By the way, again, 2 1-mana cards, Luis.
Yeah, well, I think Limited's actually really fun when 1-mana spells are good. Me too. I think that's a cool part of it.
Me too. It's just different. It's good.
For black, Bleed Dry, pretty clear winner ahead of the other spells, or, you know, in that color. Like the other removal spells, just not nearly as good as Bleed Dry. Mm-hmm. For red, Abrade, very, very good. It just ends up being a very solid removal spell. I actually love the Falconwrath Celebrants as well, but I don't think you could really justify doing anything other.
There was Flame Blessed Bolt also, which was right there with the Braid. I think you could pick either one. I like a Braid a little better just because it kills a slightly wider range for only 1 more mana.
And then for green, you got Wolfstrike and Flourishing Hunter, both as fantastic cards.
Yeah. What was the mythic uncommon for this set?
So it ended up being Blood Tithe Harvester by a lot. This is the red black 3/2. It made it into Vintage Cube, though that's kind of embarrassing, to be honest.
It really doesn't belong.
Makes a blood, and then sack it as a sorcery to give a creature -X/-X equals number of blood tokens. And the reason this card was so unbelievably good, it's not that impressive on its face, right? It's a 2-mana 3/2 that probably forces a trade, whether by combat or sacking, and makes a blood. But what it was is it's a cheap creature that you could basically use as a removal spell, and there's a lot of ways to bring creatures back from the graveyard in this set. You had Undead Butler, you had the Blood Fountain, and you had all these things that really made it so it's like, getting kind of a recurable removal spell is just so good that we're going to really go deep on this card. And it turned out that this was an excellent card, and really the best uncommon, though. I think Ballista Watcher, the pinger that flipped,
that card. Yeah,
was also very, very strong.
I love that card too. What about the worst card in the set? The biggest blank, the most last picked. The card that jumped out to me was Bramble Armor. Not just, it probably isn't the actual like worst performing card in the set. I'm not sure. I guess we could look, but usually those are like conditional cards or something. But the fact that it's in this set just really stands out to me, because why? Like, it was in the prior set and it was a total flop. It did nothing. And then it's like, oh, it's here again. Oh, okay. Well, maybe it has a home this time. No, again. Like, is there a designer that just really thinks Bramble Armor's super cool or flavorful or something? And they're just like in the meetings, just going to the mattresses for Bramble Armor over and over again? Because why? How does it keep ending up in these sets? It's been unplayable in 2 separate sets.
Yeah, I can't really explain the love for Bramble Armor, to be honest. It's not a good card and not a particularly interesting one. So, like, Snarling Wolf, at least I think was a success. It was in both sets also. And it was actually really good this time around, which is kind of cool. I still don't really get the reprint thing. Like, why reprint a couple random cards, especially like kind of unimpressive ones? It's just very, very strange. Another worst card in the set is Kaya, the Planeswalker, because she just did nothing. None of her abilities were good.
Yeah, that was that actually could be on my soapboxiest, because remember when we had the discussion about alchemy and how we don't have it for limited, yet we have cards like Kaya in the limited set that they just don't play nice with any of the cards. It doesn't line up with even the black-white deck. Yeah, that probably should be on that list. What about Boarded Window? Can we give it to Boarded Window?
But that one definitely counts.
Can we just give it to Boarded Window just as like just to send it off into the sunset? All right, worst card in the set, Boarded Window. All right, this is your specialty, Luis. What card was the most begrudgingly playable?
I liked Belligerent Guest. The 3/2 trample that makes a blood when it hits them.
Yeah, that's really good. Oh man, there's something about a 3/2, that is just like super begrudging.
The thing is, a 3-mana 3/2 is almost never gonna cost you the game in terms of like, oh my god, I can't believe I played this 3-mana 3/2. This is like, I'm just dead now.
Yeah,
but it's also like never gonna like overperform because it trades for 2 drops. It can like And then Wanderlight Spirit's kind of in this vein, the 3-mana 2/3 that can only block flyers, and it's just like, in games where you're not being attacked and this just gets to hit them a bunch of times, sure, it's fine. It's it's just like it does its job, and it's not something you're excited about, but it can be okay.
What card will you miss drafting? I said Markov Purifier. I couldn't really think of one that like stood. I liked that card, but I don't know. I didn't really have one. What did you say?
Ancestral Anger, the red.
Oh no, I want that one now. I love that card.
Draws a card and gives +1/+0 and trample for each Ancestral Anger, and that card was just sweet.
Oh, I want to steal your answer. Can I change mine?
Yeah, you can copy off my test. Why not?
All right, yeah, I'm in, because I will definitely miss drafting Ancestral Anger much more than the Purifier. I just couldn't think of one at the time. That's a great answer. What's the LSV card and the Martialist card?
I like Investigator's Journal because it's an artifact that gives you a bunch of clues, but the more clues it gives you, the less likely you are to be able to use all the clues.
And it's really slow card draw, doesn't affect the board. It's perfect for you. I picked Dream Shackle, guys. Now, I recognize this is a very powerful card. That's not actually, I just like cards like this that like put your opponent off balance and keep them that way and allow you to put pressure on them. This is a particularly pushed version, so I really like it. But even if, imagine an uncommon version of Dream Shackle Geist, I would still like that, even if it only had, 1 power or something like that. My Soapboxiest cards were definitely Boarded Windows and also the one I just mentioned, Kaya. But that was, this set happened to be out when they announced Alchemy, so there was a bunch of cards that got kind of thrown up on the soapbox with me because of that. What card do you still have to read when it's cast against you?
We don't talk about Runo, no. Runo Stromkirk is like, got a lot going on.
Yeah, it definitely does. Also doesn't really fit. The one I had was Consuming Tide. Have you ever had that cast against you? Because I have.
Yeah, this was the card that I literally reviewed it in the set and was not understanding it correctly.
Yeah, like you can read it and not know what it is. It's
yes.
2 blue sorcery. Each player chooses a non-land permanent they control. Return all non-land permanents not chosen this way to their owner's hands. Then you draw a card for each opponent who has more cards in their hands than you. Like, what? No idea what that card does. I didn't play it because I just didn't understand what it did. And then nobody ever beat me with it. That's
a pretty fair reason not to play a card.
Yeah. All right, so this is a big one, Luis. From a design and development aspect, how did the set fare? How are the mechanics? What were some of the wins and losses for the set?
So the mechanics, you got Blood, which I think was a pretty clear win. Blood was a really cool card, or a really cool mechanic, and it plays out really well. Honestly, my biggest worry with Blood is that the cards with Blood, like Blood is such a vampire-centric mechanic that I don't know how we're going to get this mechanic back very easily.
I want to see it back. Just name something generic. Call it a Sif token, whatever.
Yeah, because that's kind of unfortunate because I think it was a really, really cool mechanic and I would have loved to see more of it. It just played really well. Card smoothing mechanics tend to play well. Mechanics that that makes it so the games are more interesting are always really sweet. And I think that this mechanic really performed well on just about all the axes that you would want. So definitely a fan of Blood. Training, as we talked about before, was basically a miss. Like it just really doesn't do what you want. Like it just doesn't.
I think it was the biggest miss of the set.
And I think your point actually was really good. Shockingly good even.
I was going to say, do you have to say actually, or do we?
Which is that putting low power attackers on an aggressive mechanic is just kind of a recipe for disaster. And I don't know, maybe you could take a crack at training being, the thing that you can get going well, but I don't know. Exploit, I think, is a perfectly fine mechanic, but it just didn't work in the set. And it's not the biggest knock in the world. I want to say that not every mechanic's going to hit. That just happens. It's really hard to make sure everything pops, and also to some degree for things to be good, other things have to be less good, right? I can't think of a single set. You could maybe point me to one, I suppose, where every single mechanic and, theme in the set is like, this is great. And it works out perfectly. That's just not really how things go.
When it does seem like that, it's usually low grade of difficulty mechanics. These ones are high grade of difficulty, getting training right's hard.
And even then, look at cycling in Ikoria. Cycling, I believe, is a low grade of difficulty mechanic. Yeah. It actually got pushed too much and ended up not being something that was good.
Funny enough, yeah.
And then there's also Daybound, which was fine in the set. I actually think it worked out better in the set than Midnight Hunt. Not because, again, the mechanic was different. Just werewolves were actually pretty cool in the set, and they weren't particularly cool in Midnight Hunt, and that's that was a shame.
Yeah.
Cleave, I really just think this mechanic is atrocious. I don't know. It's really hard. It's one of my least favorite mechanics I've ever seen because it's just hey, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna put a bunch of brackets and make you kind of evaluate this this mechanic as if it were a math problem, and it's just
yeah, it feels like you're taking a high school test.
Magic the Gathering. This isn't really what I want to be doing.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, not a big fan of that, and not a mechanic I would like them to run back. So, and then there was some self mill. I wish there was more. This is, I think, one of the slight failures in the set that there just wasn't more of that going on, and that would have been pretty cool if there were.
What did you think about the tweaks to Disturb?
Oh, I like that. the Disturbed coming back as auras, I actually like that more than it was previously.
Okay.
Yeah, because basically the creatures with Disturb were just all kind of sick 2-for-1s. The auras actually make it so you need to do a little work to make the thing functional. And I think
thought it was interesting that they led with the really powerful Disturb and then gave us the like lesser but little better balance, a little better gameplay feel. You know, it's a little risky to have people go, well, this sucks compared to what I used to have. But I think that was on a subtle level, they nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great decision. So for the wins, yeah, Blood was definitely a win. I think Werewolves were a win too. Like Werewolves were actually good, and I think Werewolves were done well, are pretty fun. The losses, too many rares. That's just you can't talk about the set without talking about that, and that's it's just too much. So I think that there were more kind of mechanical execution fails than I'd like to see in most sets. When we look at these mechanics, how many of them are mechanics that really succeeded? And it's like, I think the hit rate here was not great. And that's kind of unfortunate, because you hope, well, you just hope that you get a good hit rate, and sometimes you don't. Overall, we'll talk about what we give the grade a little later, but overall, I think this set, had probably weaker than most, but still had some bright spots to it.
Yeah, to me, the big takeaway were blood tokens. Again, I'd want to see them renamed to, like I said, SIF tokens or whatever. But I'd love to see these back again. Felt perfect on balance for power level, not too powerful, but definitely affected the game. It felt like something you could tack onto a whole bunch of different types of cards if you made it more generic. And just to, those little tiny knobs that you can tweak on cards, like this card's not quite good enough. All right, we'll give it a SIF token. Okay, great. And now the format's just a little bit better for it, from the flood prevention that you get, but at a cost, right? Like if it's free, then who cares? But it makes you pay mana. It makes you make decisions, discard cards. It also rewards high skill by sometimes you have to discard spells to the thing, right? It's not like you can only discard lands to blood. Sometimes you're like, look, I've got my bomb, but I'm not going to be able to play it this game, and I'm going to discard my 7-drop so I can try to hit a land drop here in turn 4. Some players won't do that. They'll just stick, no, I'm not discarding that card. That's my best card. Skill testing, that's the stuff that I really wanted to take away, that I really like to take away positively. The negative stuff was what you outlined with the bombs and stuff, and some of the mechanical fails. Balance wise, color wise, they nailed it, right? Like, yeah, this is about as good as you get.
Yeah, I think that red and black were a little bit better. Blue was the worst, but yeah, that tracks a little bit to the, like, which of the mechanics succeeded or failed. And if the mechanics succeeded or failed, then like the more mechanics in your color that succeed, the more likely your color is to be good, and vice versa. Totally. So that's not, that's not super controversial, I don't think.
Right. What did the format teach you? Like maybe something that a tip to get better at limited, or a takeaway from it?
I think one of the things the format taught me is something we kind of joked about earlier, which is drafting the same set for 4 months kind of sucks.
It sucks. Like this gap is too big for sure.
This gap is too big. I wouldn't want to see this more, be more than it is currently.
Yeah. I mean, I was clinging to any cube I could get my hands on for like a month.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how it ends up. And, I think that's something that even if this set was better, because it's not the best, I think 4 months would have been too long. We would have gotten bored of it. And maybe some people didn't, and that's great. More power to you. This was too long for me. As for being better at limited, definitely evaluating new mechanics is tricky. Blood was good enough that Voldaren Epicure was a good card. Was not obvious on its face. Also, kind of more subtle things like, hey, blood tokens means I don't want 5-drops because I have enough 6-drops, like, or sorry, I don't want 6-drops because I have a bunch of 5-drops with blood, and I don't want to end up in a spot where I just want to loot away my 6th land and I have all these blood tokens, then I'm not able to do that. So very, very cool seeing kind of how that ended up playing out. The other thing is, like, I think the first impressions of the set aren't everything, which I think is something worth mentioning, because this set had, I think initially I was pretty down on it. And after playing it more, I actually went up on it. Like my initial rank was like, oh, this is like a D, but it actually ended up being, closer to a B- for me.
Yeah, that's actually where I ended up as well. The takeaway for me, one of the ones to always look for are cards that are a single color but really only go in 2-color decks. Like a good example was Courier Bat from this set. Really, that's a white-black card. I mean, that was the only deck that ever wanted it, and it did pretty good in that deck. Like, it was actually a card you'd like, but you didn't need to prioritize it because effectively no other decks wanted it. Even the aggressive Vampires decks, they didn't really want the card. Even as 2/2 flyer for 3, it just wasn't quite good enough. And so always be on the lookout for those, because those are the types of cards that will usually end up in the hands of the player that wants them, and you don't have to prioritize them, but they can be a good payoff. You said B- was your grade for the set?
Yeah, I would give this set a B-. Yeah,
that's what I give it too, which is totally fine, right? I mean, we're kind of used to A's these days, but like that was, thumbs up.
This is where you end up. This is where you end up,
Yep, totally. Last question. What was your favorite card in the format?
Honestly, at the end of the format, Voldar Epicure was the card that I had the most positive associations with. Just kind of loved, like, little dinky value cards are really sweet. And this one, just when you got to like play this, make a blood token, ping them, chump, get it back with Blood Fountain, you just like kind of felt like it was greasing the wheels of your deck.
Totally. My favorite card was Reckless Impulse from this set. Yeah. I mean, it has two things that I like. It has card advantage, but also like a gamble, right? Like you don't know exactly what you're getting. You have to plan around it. When you cast it really matters because, if you cast it on turn 3 and you hit a 5-drop, you're not casting the thing. Right. So you might want to hold off, but if you need to hit your land drop, you got to do it. And I like that because it gives you a real sweat every time rather than just putting the cards in your hand. It gives you that shorter window, but it incentivizes you to do that by making it cheaper than you'd normally pay for 2 cards. So I really like that card. Also, it went in the blue-red deck that ended up being kind of my favorite, for the format. Okay. So that is the VOW Sunset Show. We've got, our, preview cards to hit on real quick, and then we're going to call it a show. Our first preview card for Neon Dynasty is called Runaway Trash Bot. It's 3 mana 0/4 trample. It's an artifact creature construct. It's an uncommon, and it gets +1/+0 for each artifact and or enchantment card in your graveyard. So we don't know quite enough about the set yet to know what that's all about, but that signals that there's some cool graveyard-based stuff going on. And our other card is legit awesome. It's called Twin Shot Sniper. It's 3 and a red for a 2/3 with reach. It's an artifact creature, Goblin Archer. It's also uncommon. So 4 mana 2/3 reach. When it enters a battlefield, it does 2 damage to any target. Like, that's insane already. And then it also has Channel. You can pay 1 and a red and discard it to do 2 damage to any target.
Yeah, I mean, this card would be fantastic without Channel. Channel means it's just a win-win. If you're short on mana or you need a trick or something, it's a shock split Flame Tongue Kavu split card. Like, what else can you ask of a card?
Right. I mean, of course, the most obvious comparison is the Bone Crusher Giant. It's not quite that good, but it's like, this is an uncommon Bone Crusher Giant. It is insane.
I mean, this card has to be in the running for Mythic Uncommon of the set. We don't even know any. Like, we know a very small amount of the set.
That's right. So there you go. There's our preview cards. Thanks, Wizards, for those. We do appreciate them. Set going to call it a show there. When we come back next week, we'll see where we're at as far as spoilers goes. And, we're working towards the set review, and we'll see once we get the cards. We'll be firing up these microphones. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find all things related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Make sure you check out our sponsors, Channel Fireball for all your magic needs and FTX for all of your digital asset needs. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
So some of the news we alluded to earlier was that Star City Games has decided to effectively discontinue their support of strategy content. They said they're going to have some, but they let go basically all their premium writers. They let go Paulo and Ari and Brian and Jerry's podcast and basically Brad. Like these are Todd Anderson. These are people who have been with Star City for, in some cases, like over a decade. Mm-hmm. And basically in the letter that Pete, the president of Star City, Pete Hofling, wrote, he basically said, because Wizards isn't supporting competitive play, we aren't either. We're not running events, and part of that obviously has to do with COVID as well. But we're at this point, we don't think it's worth paying these people to write these articles. And
super sad, man.
Yeah, it really sucks because Star City has always been a competitor to Channel Fireball, right? We were both card stores. I actually left Star City to start Channel Fireball. We both sell cards. We both have strategy articles. We had every now and then authors would go from one site to another, right? And like them deciding this isn't the way to move forward isn't how I wanted to quote unquote win. This does not feel like a win, right. And also, like, at no point did I want to like crush Star City. That was never like the attitude. I think good competition can be great, and it was also good for the authors. If you didn't like what was going on at one website, or you got a better offer somewhere else, or you want to change a pace, you had options. TCG Player did this a while ago, but I don't really I never really kept up with what they were doing anyway. But I basically, it's the writing on the wall, or maybe lack of writing on the wall, for a lot of the aspects of Magic that you and I both care about a lot.
No, it makes me sad, man.
It just sucks. Like, it's I'm not, an era. Yeah. And obviously some, Twitter denizens were like, well, they could just keep writing for free, right? For the love of the community. And that's obviously just moronic. But basically, we'll see. I mean, we Huey's now the director of play programs. COVID, who knows what's going to happen there? Obviously, it's not like vanishing, but I imagine live tournaments will come back, and I would like to see what would happen, because, our plan's not to go anywhere, but it does suck that like the things we love about Magic to some degree are being chipped away. And look, it's not to say that I don't love a lot of things that aren't direct competitive play or organized play, or I need big tournaments to play Magic. I don't. I'm really happy, streaming cube drafts and playing vintage cues on Magic Online. That's a lot of how I engage with Magic, and that's really fun for me. But without this underpinning of organized play, like, we're just going to keep feeling that. And, this isn't something I'm happy about. It sucks that it happened. I feel for all the people who lost their jobs, and no one has a right to do this. I'm not saying they got screwed. They didn't get screwed. The market changed. Their employer decided it wasn't, feasible for them to employ them still. And that's sadly what happens. And I think most people kind of had contingency plans for that, right? Like, you and I have branched out many ways and many times, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. This is there's a reason that's a saying. So
that's right.
But competitive play is what was one of the things that made me love Magic the most and stay with it the longest. And I really hope there's a way forward with that, because that's just part of what I love about the game. And the game encompasses a lot of different things. Even if it's not something you're into, I think it sucks if the game loses one of those angles.
Yeah.
Much like if you're not into drafts and Magic stopped doing drafts, that would kind of suck. If, I'm not into Commander, but if for some reason Commander died off, not that it's going to, it's like the most popular way to play now, I would still be sad for the people who liked it, and
totally.
And this is, of course, a little different, because this kind of requires support from Wizards or other organizations to continue, whereas casual play doesn't, and that's part of why it's strong. But it still doesn't change the fact that this is something we love. This wasn't a good news for it, and I kind of am looking forward to try to hope that there's better news on the horizon.
Same.